appears. When the outer world remains exactly as it was, and life offers you no clear sign that the night just past has changed anything. Jung's answer offers circumstances, but the position from which you experience those circumstances has shifted. And it is precisely this silent difference that makes the morning after an inner axis shift does not begin with a powerful feeling. You do not wait. Previously, most of your reactions were automatic. You knew what to say to maintain harmony, but it is no longer the only starting point. You begin to sense a very small distance between experience and reaction, a slight pause, just enough that you are no longer completely swept along by old inertia. When the unconscious has not been seen, life unfolds like fate, like a sequence of things that are simply how they must be. But when even a small part has been seen, fate begins to lose its sense of inevitability. Not because you now control life, but because you are no longer entirely directed from a blind spot. A viewer of the channel once described his morning after like this. He still went to work, still sat in his familiar office, still listening to the same old conversations. But there was one very familiar remark that used to trigger his pride. This time the feeling still arose, but it did not pull along the habitual reaction. He did not rush to defend himself, nor did he feel the need to prove anything. Not because he had become more noble, but because somewhere inside he had realized that he no longer needed that reaction to protect an inner image that had already begun to crack the night before. The same situation, but the color of the experience is different. This change is very difficult to explain in ordinary life, because it is not a deliberate change. It is like standing up from a familiar chair and moving to a different position within the same room. The room has not changed. The furniture is the same, but the entire perspective is different. What was previously out of view now appears, and what once occupied all attention now recedes. Jung called this a shift in the center of experience, and for him, this was the deepest form of change a human being could undergo. An image that can clarify this is adjusting the focus of a camera lens. When the focal length changes, the scene remains the same. The light is the same, but sharpness is distributed differently. What was once blurry becomes clearer. What was once overly sharp softens. No new scene is created, yet the photograph is no longer the same photograph. The morning after an inner axis shift has the same structure. Life has not changed, but the way it appears to you has. What matters is this. This difference is not always pleasant. Many people assume that when the inner world shifts, life will become lighter. But Jung never promised that. Often, it is the opposite. Life may become clearer and therefore sharper. Things you previously endured unconsciously now appear with their full weight. Not to make you suffer more, but because you are no longer completely dissociated from experience. This new clarity does not bring immediate happiness, but it brings truth. One woman said that after the night she wrote down the truth, the next morning she did not feel stronger at all. On the contrary, she felt more fragile when facing familiar choices, but that very fragility was a sign that she was no longer using her old hardened shell to move through life. She did not act differently right away, but each time she repeated an old behavior, she felt very clear morally, but psychologically. The morning after, therefore, is not the beginning of a new life in an external sense. It is the first by old inertia, You may still choose to return to familiar reactions, but you no longer do so unconsciously. And for Jung, it is precisely the end of unconsciousness that changes a person's fate in the deepest sense. It only takes one night to change your life. At this level, is not a promise that everything will be better the next morning. It is a very precise description of how psychological life operates. One night is enough for the inner position to shift. From that position, the same world will never again be experienced in the same way. Not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer standing in the same place to look at it. And perhaps that is why the deepest changes in a person's life often go unnoticed by others, even by the person experiencing them. There is no clear timestamp, no declaration, no external sign, only a very ordinary morning in which the world is still the old world. But inner life has begun to follow a different logic, and from that moment on, however slowly, the road ahead cannot fully return to its old direction. Before closing this section, I invite you to pause for a moment and ask yourself what your own morning after has been like. If you have ever experienced the sense that the world remained the same while something inside you stood in a different place. Leave a very short sentence in the comments, perhaps simply, "I realized I was no longer the same." No need to explain, no need to analyze. Sometimes daring to name that moment in words is enough to prevent you from returning to the old position, and it may also become a quiet signal to someone else passing through the same threshold of change. Number 14. Why not everyone has a transformative night? At this stage, another truth gradually emerges. Not everyone pass through and shift their axis.
A soundbite.
Others pass through as well.
Playing earlier about some smell, so.
Yet the next morning, return to the exact same position as before, as if the night were nothing more than a biological pause. Jung answered this question not through morality,
I'm not sure.
or by categorizing people as deep or shallow, but through a cold psychological observation. Not everyone stays long enough in the ambiguous zone for a real movement to occur. And not staying is not always unconscious. Very often, it is a psychological choice, even if the person does not name it as such. The ambiguous zone is not romantic darkness or a mystical state. It is a very concrete space that appears when familiar structures have loosened, but no new structure has yet formed. The ego no longer fully controls, but nothing clear has emerged to replace it. The old answers are gone, but no new answers have arrived. This state is not intensely painful, but it is deeply uncomfortable because it strips away the sense of certainty that modern people rely on to feel safe. Many people cannot tolerate, they are too accustomed to having a clear story about themselves. When that story begins to crack at night, the ego's first reflex is not to face it, but to create interference.
What do you all think of
this? It tries to fill the gap as quickly as possible with thoughts, actions, explanations, reason, or by returning to familiar habits that once helped it feel okay. There is a very interesting biblical story often read as a test of faith, but when viewed through a Jungian lens, it reveals a clear psychological structure. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, they were not taken directly to the promised land, but wandered for 40 years in the desert. The desert here is not only geographical, it is the state of no longer being in the old Egypt, but not yet in the new promised land. There are no familiar structures, no guarantees, no stable rhythm of life. And it is precisely in this desert that many begin to complain, doubt, and even long to return to Egypt, despite having been enslaved there. From a psychological perspective, this is the moment when people cannot endure the transitional zone. Egypt, however harsh, is familiar. The desert is free, but empty, ambiguous, and offers the ego no foothold. Even if they cannot return geographically. And the Bible is very clear. The generation that could not endure the desert did not enter the promised land. Not because they were punished, but because they could not remain long enough in the transitional state for a new order to form. Every process of transformation has such a desert, a phase with no clear reward, no stable identity, no quick answers, and not everyone is willing to go through it. Not because they are inferior, but because they choose familiar stability over unformed truth. Jung once wrote very bluntly, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their Avoiding one's soul does not always take dramatic form. Thinking more, analyzing more deeply, or convincing oneself that now is not the right time. All of these appear mature, but sometimes they are simply refined ways of not staying with what wants to be seen. A very everyday example is people who are constantly preparing for change, but never allow change to touch them. They read books, listen to podcasts, speak very deeply about themselves, but whenever a real feeling appears, a feeling that demands stopping, silence, not knowing, they immediately shift into analysis. Analysis here is no longer a tool of understanding, but a polite form of avoidance. The ego retains control by turning everything into concepts, so that direct experience can be avoided. With night, that is meaningless. Transformation does not occur through effort, but through permission. And that permission requires one very specific thing, not returning to interference when inner truth begins to appear. This sounds simple, but in reality, it is one of the most difficult challenges of modern psychological life. Failure, in Jungian language, is not the absence of change. Failure is when people repeatedly turn away from moments that could change them and call it not ready yet, not the right time, or unnecessary. Jung did not judge this choice. He merely
My art could
pointed out
change
its
you, but you're not ready
consequence.
yet.
Axis, no matter how much the surface changes. A transformative night is not a reward for the good, nor a privilege of the deep. It is the result of staying long enough in an uncomfortable, unclear, and guarantee-free moment. Not everyone wants to pay that price, and according to Jung, not paying it is also a complete psychological choice, with all its accompanying consequences. It only takes one night to change your life, is therefore not a universal promise. It does not apply to everyone. To choose the familiar light over the ambiguous darkness, to choose known stability over formless truth, to choose to continue living through old mechanisms rather than accepting a phase of not knowing who one is. Jung did not try to persuade people to change. He simply drew a map and let each person decide where they wish to go. And on that map, there are no shortcuts. Either you stay in the desert long enough for a new order to form, or you return to night you do not run from. After all the silent movements that have unfolded in the previous layers, when the ego lost its veto power, when truth was seen without requiring action, when the inner axis locked into place while outer life remained unchanged, The remaining question is no longer, was that night powerful enough? But something far simpler. During that night, did you stay with yourself or not? Not every night is the same. Most nights in life are merely biological continuations of the previous day. The body rests, kind of night, not because it is longer, deeper, or more dramatic, but because in that night, a person does not run away. Running away here is not a concrete action. It rarely has a clear form. It does not necessarily mean leaving the room or picking up your phone. Running away, in the Jungian sense, is any attempt to quickly return to the familiar position of the ego. Rationalizing, reassuring, analyzing, blaming, or soothing oneself with the thought that everything will be fine. These reactions are very subtle. They do not look negative. Considered mature, positive, and self-regulated inner life. A night capable of changing a life is not a night when you fires that you not betray what you are feeling by retreating into the familiar stories the ego uses to keep everything in its old place. This can be understood very simply through an image. Imagine a person standing at a crossroads at night. If they rush to choose a direction simply to escape the feeling of suspension, they will continue moving, but not necessarily in the right direction. But if they stand still long enough, quiet enough, without forcing themselves to decide, the surrounding space will gradually reveal details that were previously unseen. Distant lights, faint sounds, the direction of the wind. A transformative night is like this. It does not give you a map. It only gives you time to stand still so you do not push yourself back onto the old road out of fear of ambiguity. A night without carries a particular weight, because it does not need to be repeated many times to take effect. One moment in which you do not betray your present feeling with familiar self-soothing is enough for the inner axis to shift slightly. And once the axis has shifted, you may delay, hesitate, and move very slowly. But you are no longer standing entirely in the old position. This also explains why many people read Jung, listen to Jung, understand Jung intellectually, yet never experience what he describes. Not because they lack understanding, but because they always return too quickly. They touch ambiguity and then leave. They feel something and immediately try to explain it, rationalize it, or turn it into a goal. And so the night passes without anything truly happening, even though on the surface it may appear very deep. One night is enough, but only if it is a night in which you do not betray yourself by running away from what is present. Not every night offers that opportunity, but psychological life, according to Jung,